ladies and gentlemen, for the next sessions, you will get to see the speakers full figure in the flesh, finally on stage live with us. Now, we gathered today a panel of seasoned deal makers to discuss and share insights on M&A and investments in the gaming space. And for that, our panelists are Justin Scarpone from Scarpone, Michael Cheung from Makers Fund, and Brendan Mulligan from Riot Games. Moderating this panel is Nahm from the Global Top Round Accelerator. Now, GTR is one of our co-located events, and you'll be hearing more about them tomorrow morning. For now, please join me in welcoming Rick, Justin, Michael, and Brendan to the stage.
Is it working? Working fine? Good morning, everybody. Nahm here. Thank you for all coming at these, tough times. I know it's tough, getting yourself tested and all. But again, thank you. And thank you for the Gamescom Asia team. So we have here today 3 guests. So Brendan is beaming in. And we have Michael, and then we have Justin. So let's do some intros first, like brief intros about yourselves. Let's start with that.
All right. Well, first of all, it's so nice to be in an in-person conference. First time in 2 years. It feels extremely very well organized. So my name is Michael Cheung. I'm a founder and partner at Makers Fund. We're a dedicated gaming industry venture capital fund based here in Singapore, but we have teams and offices all around the world. And we've invested in 70 companies in the gaming industry and growing since 2017.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Justin Scarpone, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Scarpone Asia Pacific, actually based in Tokyo. It's my first live event, almost 2 years, so I'm probably a little rusty, but I'll do my best. It's great to be back here in Singapore.
Brendan?
I'm back home in Los Angeles. I'm Brendan Mulligan. I'm the Director of Corporate Development at Riot Games, where I manage investments and acquisitions. So we've got a portfolio of a few dozen early stage investments and have recently closed a few acquisitions, including like Hypixel Studios, which you might have heard about last year.
All right, awesome. So since we only have like 40 minutes, which is crazy, because in order for these guys' brains, I think it'll take much more time. But again, 40 minutes is what we'll work with. So let's just start it off. So first question, a few questions. I'll just start to ask, and then if we have questions from the audience or up on screen online, I'll just try to attend to them as well. Okay. So first question. I'll try to make it simple and easy. So since this is Gamescom Asia, right? So I just wanted to ask you guys about because there's a lot of things happening in Asia right now in gaming, right? So just to hear your thoughts on Asia in the gaming world right now. How do you guys see it right now? How do you guys see it panning out in the next 5 years or so? Right? And if there are any regions or countries that really you guys are like, okay, that's a really interesting country, right? Where your focuses are. Brendan, you wanna start off, hit it off?
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I think there's no question that Asia is going to continue to be one of the most important regions in the world for gaming, both from a supply side where we have some of the most talented developers in the world, and a demand side with the largest audience of passionate gamers that you can find. I don't expect that to go away. I expect that to continue to grow. When you ask for any individual country, it's hard to not be thinking about China, just given the size of that market and the number of really talented teams that there are there. But we've been very excited to be able to be in kind of across the entire region, and we expect the whole region to grow.
Awesome. Justin or Michael?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a lot of trends that we could deep dive on, but I think one of the things that's interesting to me is Asia's already the largest, from a consumer perspective, the largest region in the world for gaming, and certainly the center of most of the talent in the industry for the world. But it's a very exciting, more recent trend to just see so many Asia-based studios and publishers flexing their muscle in the Western world. So that really expanding into global players and not just regional players, and really leading in innovation and creativity on a global scale, which I think in the past 3 years has become more and more the case.
Yeah, one of the interesting trends that we've just seen in the gaming industry is that normally there's some form of catalyst that creates gaming hubs in the world. And I think if you think back to, for example, how Finland became a gaming hub, it really was kind of Nokia then forming essentially what was Digital Chocolate and then became Supercell and Rovio. And so these kind of events are what I find really interesting because that's kind of how the next generation of gaming talent is formed is you either have a large gaming publisher starting a studio and the kind of lead talent or the key people there essentially take that risk and the jump to form the next generation, or you just simply have someone in a company that inspires them and they take that risk. And so what's really interesting to me is that countries like India, Indonesia, of course here in Singapore, you're seeing that catalyst event happen now, right? India with the kind of real push of real money gaming or companies like Winzo and NPL, really inspiring entrepreneurs and founders to take that risk. You look at Indonesia and the rest of Southeast Asia, Mobile Legends, the biggest market there is Asia, and this is going to be inspiring the next generation of gaming founders. And so that's, population aside, I think that is really what makes it exciting. And also, hopefully, in the next 5 years, gives precedents for, as Justin said, kind of globally facing studios and creators.
Awesome. Okay, so associated with that, with all you guys, what you guys just said, from an investments point of view then, right? Would there be any challenges that you guys see or foresee, in Asia, in general?
Okay, I'll take that one first. This is a very subjective point of view, but for Scopely, which is just, over the past decade or so, has established itself as one of the top free-to-play mobile game developers and publishers in the Western world. The challenges in my mission, in our mission here in Asia, is more about how do we evolve Scopely into a global company that can create content and distribute content in the East in a competitive fashion as it does in the West. So the challenges for us are largely structural, how we go about the process of game development, live operations, how we think about things such as multi-platform distribution, payment solutions, community management in multiple languages and cultures. Scopely's done a good job of that in the West. Our challenge now is to really broaden that to a much larger and arguably a far more competitive part of the world here in Asia. So we have a lot of challenges specific to our organization. And I think that's pretty common with a lot of the top-tier Western companies trying to build a business in this part of the world.
Yeah, I think also there was maybe an evolution in the industry, in the gaming industry, maybe 4 years ago, where the industry went from a default model of, I want to build a game, I need to find a publisher, to now, I want to make a game, how can I get it funded? And, venture capitalists aside, there's also, project financing, there's funding, there's grants, the platforms are funding content. And I think there's kind of an education shift that's happening as we speak. And this will really help kind of charge and accelerate the kind of the challenges of funding. I think that's one part. And another part that to me is, is let's see how the local markets evolve, which is the mindset of making a game for just your local market versus regional versus global. And this is something that takes a bit of time to shift. I'm seeing some studios recently that are thinking also about the global market, but it's a little bit of an orthodox view still, right? I think the local markets are still big enough in, say, India, right, or say Indonesia to have very localized games. But the real question is, when do we get to the point, or if indeed we will get to that point where we'll see, the next global mobile gaming studio, but in Thailand, right? And I think that is a really interesting shift that will require not just funding, but it's kind of talent, experience, and also more of a global view.
No, and I think when you speak about challenges in investing in Asia specifically, I think the opportunity that Michael calls out of these big global studios can now come from anywhere. As an investment team, that represents its own kind of unique challenge, building a network of talented founders kind of all over the world. And I ask myself the question of how do I build relationships with somebody in Indonesia or in India while I'm in LA? And I think that is going to be a really unique challenge for all of our companies to solve, is just how do we extend the networks that we've traditionally relied on to all of these different regions.
Okay, so let's stick to that topic then. Okay, so we talked about a lot of things. So sticking to that point, how do you get investments then, right? So obviously there are going to be a lot of developers here, tuning in. So I just want to ask that question. How do you get investments? Because there are VCs out there, and then there are angel investors. There are people like us, accelerators, and then there are government officials, government bodies, agencies that give out funding, public funding, and so on and so forth. But how do you go about I guess it's a very broad subject, but how do you get investments? When do you go for it? And what do you really focus on? Who do you target to? Do you Michael? Do you does somebody just email you? How does it work?
Yeah, so before COVID, I would have said just go to an event like this and ping people, say hi, anything. I think the reality of remote working these days is that it doesn't really matter where you are. In the past, it was locational, right? If you're a Southeast Asian-based developer, maybe you're on a tighter budget, to get to Gamescom, to get to GDC was kind of tough. And so I think now everyone who is in the business of funding games in some way has gotten very used to just online meetings. So I tend to think that if you just reach out via LinkedIn or emails or just asking friends for suggestions on who to meet, I think it's a little bit underappreciated, how effective that can be. And my suggestion is just to keep it short and succinct in the first message and just say, hey, look, I'm an indie dev working on this kind of game. Here's my website. Would love to chat. And with no agenda, right? And from the investor perspective, I think I don't necessarily need to meet someone with the specific goal of fundraising. I actually enjoy the most when I'm talking to people just about games and what they want to do and their vision. And I think that's probably the easiest and most casual way.
All right.
I probably look at things a little bit different. I would guess my perspective or Scopely's is similar to Riot's, perhaps. I will make that assumption that obviously we're not a VC. We're not in the business of making angel investments. We are a developer and publisher ourselves. So our investments are very much wrapped around finding those studios that we believe, with our help from a capital standpoint, from a operational standpoint, from a publishing standpoint, have something special. So how do you identify those studios? And there's a lot of competition, right, to find these studios. So how do you find these studios as early on as possible and help add value to what they're trying to achieve while allowing them to maintain their independence to create what inherently they're capable of creating. So what we do at Scopely is we have a corp dev group. These are guys that are living day to day, analyzing hundreds of studios around the world, KPIs, cap tables, crunching a tremendous amount of data and teeing up all types of interesting studios to go out and build relationships with. But at the end of the day, and specific to Asia, we believe that having people in these strategic markets, such as Singapore, where our GM in Singapore, Derek, who's sitting right over there, Derek Sim, is helping us look at the region. He has counterparts in Korea and in China where they're trying to build, once we've identified studios, actually build those connections, get to know the teams, the key people in the development groups, the leadership teams, and understand if it's a fit or not. Because when we make investments, we typically, these are long-term partnerships where the ultimate outcome is going to impact our P&L, and it's not a pure investment. So we have a little bit of a different lens when we look at studios.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think Riot's answer is somewhere kind of between the two. In a lot of ways, I think we act like a VC. We do early stage investments. We tend to not acquire for earnings or some of those other things that other large game companies do. And we've historically only published Riot originated titles. So for us, it really is about finding the right talented teams who have a shared vision for how they're going to make lives better for gamers, how they have a player focused outlook, what they're going to do that's disruptive in the marketplace, and how, like he did say, we're going to work together, or what we can add from a funding standpoint or an operational standpoint can help achieve that vision. But like a lot of VCs, it's the same thing. It's we want you to reach out to us, let us know what you're working on. I will say I think the most successful reach outs are often warm intros. If you can use LinkedIn and see that you know somebody who knows me or knows somebody on the team, that can do a lot of work because we see a lot of deals, and that really qualifier can be very nice. But yeah, we're definitely in a digitally connected world where you can find us online and get in touch with us. And like they said, I don't do as much traveling these days anymore, so I'm getting very used to talking through a screen like this.
All right. So then, okay. Again, just to add on. So how would you? So because I'm pretty sure that you guys review a lot of, you get a lot of emails, you get a lot of referrals, right? So how do you actually stand out, within that crowd of group, right? How do you actually stand out? Because I think I've heard vision sharing, shared visions, and all that. But how do you actually stand out? What gets you excited as an investor? Right, so is it I don't know, because we see in the news, right, in articles, 5 veterans out of this AAA gaming company, and all of a sudden they have a concept and they raised 20 mil, right? And then you see a lot of these so-called very very talented devs that are a team of let's say 5, same size. And then they also have a playable build even, right? And they're struggling to get investments. And so how does that work, right? If I'm an investor, if I'm a developer, how do I make myself stand out? What do you guys look at?
Well, I'll take that first. So, I think there's several different cases, right? I think there's the case that That's No Moon. We had a presentation earlier this morning, right, where the funding and the amount that they were able to raise in their partnership with Smilegate definitely, starts from the credibility of the leadership team, what they have done, what their track record is. There are instances when Scopely will make investments based upon that. Sometimes we're making investment decisions based upon advanced KPIs, games that are in soft launch in a couple of territories and showing real promise. And feel like they would be additive to our slate. We will decide to pursue opportunities based on that. We just are in the process of closing an investment in Korea where it's a brand new studio and a brand new game that has no KPIs as of yet. But based upon the leadership team, as well as the genre that they're creating and the playable that they've showed us, we believe it would be very complementary to our slate. So I would say there's multiple different instances. But there is no substitute for a proven team. A team that's worked together, can point to successful titles that they've been associated with. Because in gaming, that's very hard. And so when you find people like that, you really need to run them through the diligence and see if it makes sense for you.
I'll add that I think a lot of generalist VCs from the more consumer side don't have as much information on what a good game looks like, and so they're going to lean extra hard into the founding team. And so I think some of the headlines of very large dollar amounts that we're seeing over the last couple of years from those generalist VCs are often predicated on that to some degree. I think I'd like to believe that one of Riot's advantages as an investor is we make games, and hopefully we have good taste and we know what it looks like to have a team that is onto something. And so we will spend time even with a team who's never made something before, if they have a strong orientation to the audience, the way that Riot does, and they have a compelling vision for what they're creating, and then they can sit down with our game designers and our producers and have an intelligent conversation about what they're creating. Our diligence process looks a lot like our internal R&D process, where we just sit you down with our design leadership and have those conversations. And if you're talking about a credible vision for the future, that can cover some of the gaps in leadership background. But of course, like he said, there is very little replacement or substitute for having successfully made good games before, not just because, I think people want to bet on past winners, but because it usually helps you be better at hiring, you don't make first time mistakes, all those things, but it's not the only way to succeed.
Yeah, so, absolutely agree with what Brendan and Justin said on team and experience. I think, however, there's also more of a flip side that we also focus on, not too dissimilar actually to what Brendan was discussing on really playing the game and having opinion. We backed a number of founders who are either making their first or second game, where the first game wasn't a hit success in any means. And the reason we ended up getting conviction is because, firstly, there was a playable. I think that's, whether it's a prototype or it's just something you can just see, I think that's very important, because you get a kind of a manifestation of how a creative designer really thinks about that experience. And then secondly, we kind of really like to understand what is the kind of game designer's thinking for why they're building this experience, what is the indicator in the market with the existing titles that makes them believe strongly that, hey, there's an opportunity in this mechanic or in this gameplay or in this genre. And so we do really like to meet creators early to kind of understand that journey. And so, yeah, for the studios we've backed where they don't have a kind of a designer AAA CV, I would say what gets us over the line really is that really deep insight into player behavior and opportunity in the market, and ideally some form of small playable to back that up.
Thank you. So, up on the screen, there are questions coming up. I think, Michael, you kind of touched upon this just now. But again, going back to so-called indie, I try not to use the word indie, but so a game startup, right? So you're a dev, you don't have that, AAA, experience, but you want to make it out, right? So what can these guys do to start building up that experience, number one? And then, what can they do further to kind of, actually be able to secure an investment? What do you guys think?
Well, it's a great question, and I think in the past 2 or 3 years, with all the global sort of consolidation that's been happening in the industry, a lot of M&A going on, I think, if you're a new startup, you may have some concerns that it's becoming more and more difficult to bubble up and get attention. I don't think that's the case, because the moment people think things are in the M&A market acquiring down, new things occur. Blockchain gaming is a good example of that, right? Where now there's all this new opportunity for growth, and the companies that are popping up are companies you've never heard of. So for my perspective on these young companies, let's say passionate but young, inexperienced leadership, but with a great idea, there's always going to be opportunity. I think that, how do you get a foot in the doors is the question. And sometimes that can come through relationships. A more senior person in the industry who can introduce you to potential investors. Or you have, from a previous job, connections in larger game studios that can advise and perhaps might even be interested in putting some capital in this. I do think the relationship building angle is critical, particularly when you don't have KPIs you can point to, or let's say a top selling title that you've been associated with previously. But I do think there's always going to be a lot of demand and interest in new titles from new studios. You just need to kind of have somebody who can advise you on how to navigate the investment world, because there's so many different types of investors. And it's not just about getting the money. You can go take a loan from a bank too. It's about finding the right partner who can add value to your startup. Be it a VC, an angel investor, or someone like Scopely or Riot, who are larger players in the industry.
Thank you.
I think go somewhere where you can ship stuff. Nothing really beats working on a title that is actually launched, experiencing the kind of ups and downs of managing it, and the trials and tribulations of iterating on launch day through to making it hopefully a successful title. So as someone if you're really starting in the industry, ship stuff, try to place yourself in some kind of company or studio where they are innovating in some kind of mechanic, genre, platform. And I think don't be afraid to just cold reach out to maybe not just the AAAs, right? There are a lot of really interesting companies that are backed by investors, or they're funded enough where the job is secure, and they're working on very interesting things. And don't be afraid to just message people and see if there's an opportunity. And then I tend to believe that those people who've been in that environment tend to see what are the kind of the challenges, and therefore really know what they're going into when they go eventually to start their own company or studio.
Yeah, I'll agree with what they both said, and just kind of double down on both that idea of there's just no replacement for having shipped something before, but also to what Justin said is it's really about finding the right partner for funding. Riot makes a specific type of game for a specific type of audience, so there's maybe a narrow group of things that we're going to invest in. That's going to look very differently than what Scopely is going to invest in, which might look very differently than what Makers is going to invest in. And there's an entire field of smaller indie publishers that provide a whole other angle as well. So get ship experience and find the partner that works for you is great advice.
All right, thank you. So another question popped up. I think it's generally Southeast Asia. So we've kind of been profiling as Asia right now, right? So to cut it down, if we need to kind of scope into the Southeast Asian market, what does that look like for you guys as of today? So let's kind of break it down into two. So development, right? Development in Southeast Asia but on the other side, you have the market, right? The market size, the opportunity. So what do you guys take on that?
Yeah, it's a great question and entirely relevant for today. I mean, I think when I go to LA or speak with our LA leadership, they expect me to present them the Asia strategy, which I always sort of laugh at. I said, well, we don't have an Asia strategy. We have about 4 Asia strategies, right? And China in and of itself requires a unique strategy. Japan, Korea, you could say the same thing. And certainly for Southeast Asia. So the interesting thing about Southeast Asia for us is that, obviously huge growth happening right now and is going to continue for years to come on the consumer side. And it's going to become one of our highest priority regions over the next 5 years as a company on the consumer side. So what does that mean on the development and the publishing side? I'll stay away from publishing because it's, I think that the hurdles in publishing in Southeast Asia are widely understood by this audience. Payment and live ops and language differences and regulatory differences. Everybody understands that. And you need to figure that out. But on the development side, what is interesting to me is that, and working with Derek Sim and the rest of our team down here in Singapore, is we're meeting more and more, let's say, Malaysia or the Philippines or Singapore, often working with local government officials to identify these sort of, to the previous question, these young, hungry startups that are new. They believe now that they can build a very large company from Southeast Asia to the world in the gaming space. That's a dream. That's a very realistic dream. And in blockchain gaming, we're already seeing examples of that. Southeast Asia-based, globally competitive companies. So I think it's very much the time is now to be looking and finding those companies with something special. It's not easy because there's a lot of them. And there is a fair amount of mediocrity as well. It's when you have volume, you also need to find the excellence and have that bubble up. So a lot of what our team here is starting to focus on is building those relationships and really getting to understand the studios that we believe are going to be regionally and more likely globally competitive. But it's a relatively new phenomenon. Certainly for Scopely, in the past year, we've just started doing this.
Yeah,
I think Riot's been fortunate that. Please go.
Go for it, Brandon.
I was gonna say Riot is fortunate, that we've had success with League of Legends in the region for a very long time. Vietnam in particular was a huge region for us, and we expect that to continue, especially as we have Wild Rift out now and you're going into more and more mobile products. The region's only going to become more important to us. And yeah, to the same point, finding that development talent is going to be really interesting. It's a question I frankly ask myself a lot, is like, how do I identify the best Vietnamese developers and the best Indonesian developers, and our success with the player audience is probably ahead of our success as an investment team in the region, and that's something we're going to be thinking about a lot.
Yeah, and I think the beautiful thing about the gaming industry is that you can have cities like Finland or Tel Aviv or Istanbul suddenly pop up and be huge gaming hubs, right? So, there is, on a development side, there is absolutely nothing stopping cities in Southeast Asia to become just as relevant and just as important. I think a good indicator today as to where we are is just on the phone last week with a Vietnamese developer, and they were telling me that salaries for game developers are up 30 to 50%, right? So it's clearly already happening. And so from a development perspective, Southeast Asia is going to be extremely relevant, I think, in the coming 5 years.
All right. Okay, so an additional question to that. So we did Asia, and then we did Southeast Asia, right? So since we're sitting here in Singapore, what about Singapore then? Do you guys think that, what does Singapore have to do? And maybe it can be like two questions, right? So what does Singapore have to do as a country? Because like there's the ecosystem, right? So the government, and then there's developers and all that stuff, like education. What would Singapore as a market have to do to kind of, what can they do better, improve?
That's a very tough question. I don't profess to be an expert, but in the market, I've lived here a couple of years, but it was a very long time ago. But what I would say is, if you look at a lot of these cities that are becoming, bases for regional or global game development, Tel Aviv or Istanbul, interesting, fairly recent developments. We have a hub in Barcelona, and that's another part of the world that's really gotten exciting for IT more broadly and game development in particular. I think that Singapore has the potential to do that because it has the right balance of IT literacy, talent, language capability. It really can be a regional hub. What I'm less knowledgeable about is how much a Singapore-based studio can drive a global business from a creative perspective, meaning that could they come up with the 100% original idea that people in the United States or in Japan must play? I haven't seen that yet, and that's about individuals to a large extent, though. It's not about necessarily regulation or capital. How are those ideas being facilitated? How are those ideas being encouraged by the investment community? So what we can do on the investment side is encourage people to take risks and really go after things out there, like whatever the case may be, blockchain gaming or whatever the next fad is, or the next genre that becomes important. I'm not sure that Singapore has that today just because I'm ignorant. They very, very well may have it, but I don't think we've seen the results of that yet.
Yeah, so not an easy question. I think following the hub and spoke model that is often used by tech companies in Singapore is kind of an intuitive solution. Actually, what Justin mentioned about Tel Aviv is an interesting one because what a lot of people don't know also about a lot of the Israeli gaming companies is that every single Israeli gaming company has a Kiev secondary office or sub-office. And that's where the real work gets done. And so I suspect that a sustainable model in Singapore could be to do a very similar model, right? You kind of have two offices. One is Singapore, and the other is, be it Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, a place where there is some kind of development talent. Frankly speaking, I think this model is already being leveraged to a smaller degree by some of the larger publishers. But I think this is probably the more sustainable model, rather than say, hey, let's build another Ubisoft, right, in Singapore, because just the frank challenge of migrating so much talent into a country is non-trivial.
I'll take a slightly different approach. Riot has already publicly announced that we're building a Singapore studio. So I think we can confidently say at this point that we do believe in that model. I think it will have hints of what he mentioned, with that group will also help manage other developers in the region. But I don't think we're in agreement necessarily that you can't have that talent in Singapore itself. I think Singapore is a wonderful place to work for talented tech developers, and we're going to have a lot of talent there.
All right, interesting. Okay. Okay, so I see another question. So lucrative versus creative. What do you guys take? Commercial, is that more important? Like creativity, what is it?
You can't have lucrative without creative, in my opinion. I spent 17 years in Disney. I've seen a lot of things that were perceived as creative, but never going to monetize, and then monetize like crazy. Across all of our businesses, film, consumer products, television, games, you name it. When we first came up with Disney Tsum Tsum, nobody thought it was going to make any money. $2.5 billion later, a mobile game that's been going 7 years and still very strong. It turned out that it wasn't just creative, it was lucrative. So I don't think they're different topics. And in fact, if you're just going for monetization, players today are far too sophisticated and they have far too many options. They'll move on very quickly.
Michael?
If you think about all of the most well-known successes in the last 5 years, every single one was an original idea, right? Just implemented in a very particular way, right? Fortnite, PUBG, Candy, even League of Legends and the MOBA category was kind of incredibly kind of fresh reimagining of a Warcraft 3 mod. So absolutely agree with Justin. This is not mutually exclusive. In fact, it's almost necessary to combine the two. And indeed, if you were to look at the top 10 app stores, say on iOS, you probably won't see a copycat or a 100% kind of similar title.
I'll agree with both of them, though I will add that there are a lot of very creative things that are not lucrative. And so sometimes the job of an investor is to find things that we do think are capable of both. And I think a lot of that comes down to having a sense of who the audience that you're going after is. Even if it's something that's brand new and totally original, you should still have a sense of like what type of player is interested in experiencing that and how you're going to serve that player. And if you can do that creatively, then you'll have, a very lucrative business.
Actually, Brendan is so on point there. There are some very unsexy genres where you won't really think about our big gaming categories, but suddenly you research it and you realize, oh my gosh, someone's making hundreds of millions of dollars on this. Think about games like Sudoku, right, or crossword puzzles. You'd be very surprised just how successful these games can be. Even bingo.
Yes. So I think it's creativity first, Calvin. So there goes your answer. All right. So I think we have around 3 minutes left. I think there are a lot of questions coming up. Blockchain is definitely one of them. COVID. So let's do one more maybe. Blockchain is a huge topic, and so it might take a bit more time, but let's do that. Let's do blockchain, let's do metaverse, let's do NFT.
30 seconds each. Okay, well, what I'd say is Scopely's already made its first investment in blockchain gaming. You can expect to see more. We're quite interested. How that will evolve, though, is also something we're interested in from a product and customer experience perspective. In fact, that's probably more important. Does it become an evolution of current free-to-play games? Are they separate? where's the crossover and where are the branches beyond gaming? Leveraging, play to earn and NFTs. How does that connect outside of the game, and how can we play a part in that? We haven't figured that out yet, but that's very much on the front burner.
Yep, we do. So 3 of our companies have already pivoted into NFT-based games, and we have a dedicated team member looking at crypto games for the last year.
Yep, same. Riot has already made an investment in the space. We'll continue to make more. I don't think it'll ever become the majority of our portfolio, frankly. I don't think that this traditional free-to-play games ecosystem is going anywhere, but we certainly think there's an opportunity here to solve some new player needs, and we want to be supportive of that.
Wow, that was short. Okay. All right, so I think we have time for one more question, and I'll ask this. So you guys invested to a lot of companies, right? So what's your take? I mean, what appeals you more? Would it be like a team that wants to go on and on and on themselves, or a team that is looking to get acquired?
We prefer studios that have their own unique culture, that even after being acquired can maintain that culture and do what they do well within the broader Scopely, what we call the Scopely OS or ecosystem. So when we make an acquisition, we're not looking to fully integrate and destroy what was good about the company in the first place. We're very careful about that. We do prefer M&A if we can, because we think operationally that makes sense in a lot of instances, but that's not, that shouldn't be at the expense of culture and what got them there, the things that work.
I think Riot has a very similar view. I will say though, there's no 2 M&A deals are the same, and sometimes teams come in with a creative idea, but they really want to get bear hugged by Riot and become part of the culture and work with us for many years to develop that product in a very holistic way. And other times we have teams that end up standing a little bit more on their own. And so it really comes down to what is best for the game and what's best for the team that's making it.
Yeah, no special answers from me. I think we actually don't think too much about that. What's more important is what is the team's ambition. Frankly speaking, 90-something% of gaming studios will be acquired anyway, regardless of what the founder may kind of want in the beginning. And so, yeah, I think it either way is fine.
All right, we have our clock blinking like crazy, and so I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you both, and Brendan too, for beaming in. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And so can we just, all right, awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Thanks for having us.